We're excited to be here today, and we really appreciate your interest in becoming certified organic. So as a coordinator, what we do is whenever you submit your paperwork to us, we do the initial review, and we also come and we'll do your inspection. And also we become, like, if you have any questions about what products you can use, you'll contact either me or Catherine based off of where you're at. I do this section of South Carolina from Columbia all the way to Greenville in the upstate, and Catherine covers like the low state and everything. I can go ahead and pull up my presentation. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Do you want to add anything, Catherine, before we get started?
Nope, that about covers it.
Okay. So a lot of times, one of the biggest misconceptions is what is USDA organic, and so it's like a labeling term that refers to an agricultural product produced in accordance to the Act and regulations of the USDA organic regulations. Organic production, it's the production system that is managed in accordance to the Act and the regulations, and it's the part to respond to the site-specific conditions by integrating cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. And then some more of the terms. Agricultural product is any agricultural commodity or product, whether it's raw or processed, including any commodity or a product derived from livestock that is marketed in the United States for human or livestock consumption. A non-agricultural substance is a substance that is not a product of agriculture, such as a mineral or bacterial culture that is used as an ingredient in agricultural production. So what organic is, it's a marketing term that applies only to agricultural products. A lot of things like we can't certify, like we had a couple of people ask if we could certify their fertilizers, and we can't do that. And then verification that the products were produced and handled in accordance with the Act and regulations that for the organic production. And then it's a site-specific production system, meaning that everything on that farm, or not everything, but the end product was handled according to the Act and regulations. And the main focus of organic is to cycle resources and promote ecological balance and conserve biological diversity. Organic is not a food safety claim. It's not a food nutrition claim. It's not produced using synthetic chemicals, fertilizers, genetic engineering, irradiation, or sewage sludge. It's not a term that can be applied to non-agricultural products like fertilizers and those kinds of products. Just a little bit of a background is the Congress passed the Organic Foods Production Act of 1990, and it's under the Title VII of U.S. Code Chapter 94 Organic Certification, directed the USDA Agricultural Marketing Services to create the national organic standards, because they kind of had an issue with, like, each state was doing its own organic certification. So an organic apple in New York might have not gone through the same process that an organic apple in California went to. That's why they decided to do a national standards. Then it went to NOSB, and it's a 15-member volunteer board appointed to 5-year terms by Secretary of Agriculture. And it was 4 farmers, 3 environmentalists, 3 public consumer advocates, 2 handlers, 1 retailer, and 1 scientist, toxicology, ecology, biochemist, and 1 certifying agent. It took them, I think, about 10 years to finally produce the final national organic regulations. And currently those regulations change on a daily basis, but we're usually notified when there's any changes to the regulation. And currently there's 45,545 operations certified to the NOP internationally, and then 27,784 operations are certified in the US alone. So our program, we're the only land-grant institution accredited by the USDA to give organic certification. We've been in the program since 2002. We're one of the 77 accredited certifying agents across the United States and across the world. And then we currently certify 65 out of the 101 operations in South Carolina. Our biggest scope is crops, and then handling and livestock. A couple of them have both a crop and a livestock certification, so they kind of overlap. And then we only certify operations in South Carolina. And then organic production and handling in South Carolina usually equals about 50 million a year, because we do have to record gross organic sales of our operations. So that's kind of how we totaled that number up. The organic certification process. So as an applicant, you'll complete an organic system plan. And this kind of just shows how your operation will comply to the organic regulations, and then any supporting documentation to us, like including like where you're getting your livestock from, what kind of things your livestock is eating, any material inputs you put on their grazing area, and you'll also have to pay like a certifier fee in order to obtain certification. So once that paperwork is submitted, me or Catherine will then review it to make sure it's complete and compliant, or you have the ability to comply with the standards. And then after we do this, we do an inspection on site just to make sure what you put on your paperwork matches what you're actually doing at your operation. And we identify any additional concerns, maybe things that you need to change to make sure that you can comply with the regulations. And during this inspection, we do two types of audit. We do a mass balance, which will look at, for example, for a crop operation, we look at how many tomatoes they harvested, sold, and then how many plants they actually planted to make sure that they're not producing 2,000 tomatoes from 2 organic tomato plants. And then we also do a trace back. So record keeping is a big component of organic certification. We want to look at your records. We want to see what you're applying, any field activity, if the animal is coming and going from the farm, those kinds of things. With the trace back, we'll look at like a sales invoice or a harvest record, and then trace it back all the way to the beginning stages where you got that animal, and anything it's been consuming over those months or years it's been there. And then the last step is the final review, which is conducted by someone other than me or Catherine. Generally, whoever does your inspection does not do your decision. And they verify that the operation complies with the standards, and then they make the certification decision. And this process is repeated annually, but after your first year, you just submit like an OSP update. So you don't have to fill out a full OSP. You only have to do that every 3 years. And then after your initial year, the fees do decrease a little bit. So this is kind of like the paperwork that we require. I touched a little bit on the organic system plan, and that just shows how your operation intends to comply to the regulations. The dry matter intake form is to verify that the ruminant livestock have no less than 30% of their dry matter intake from the pasture. The livestock inventory form is where you're going to list all of your livestock, where you got the animal from, any reasons it's leaving, if it's been harvested, those kinds of things. And then a field history, it shows what's been planted or applied to the field in the past 3 years. And then the input material inventory shows what you plan on using for your animals or for your fields. And these generally require prior approval before buying to make sure you don't apply or spray anything that's prohibitive through the organic certification. This is kind of our fee cycle. It's $750 for the initial certification fee, and this includes review, inspection, and final decision. Recertification fees consist of a $200 application fee plus an assessment fee, which is 0.5% of the previous year's organic sales. And then the fees are capped at $7,500 annually. But the USDA does have a cost share program, and we have the information for that. And they'll give you up to 50% of your annual certification fees, up to $500. We have a couple operations that do apply for this, and they have no issues getting that money back. And then Catherine will take over.
So the general requirements for certification, these are the requirements for everyone that applies for certification. The scopes being crop, you can apply as a crop person, livestock handler, or the handling, which is actual agricultural food products. So everyone that applies for general certification must submit the OSP, like Jill said. The OSP is kind of an ongoing document between the applicant and the certifier. It describes the practices and procedures that will be performed on the farm. It will list any substances, material inputs or handling inputs that will be used at the operation. It'll describe monitoring practices and how that applicant will maintain organic integrity, describe the practices that will prevent commingling of organic and non-organic products, and then obviously any additional information that's required. But you will do this initially, a complete OSP, and then every 3 years you have to submit or every year you submit an update, and then every third year you redo your OSP. So the general again, continuing with the general requirements, the land requirements. The land must be managed in accordance with 205, 203, and 205, 206. These are NOP regulations, which in a couple slides I'll explain what that actually means. But it's important to know that before you can either harvest, or in this case, before the animal can graze on the land, it has to have not had prohibited substances applied within those previous 3 years. Also, the land must have defined boundaries and buffer zones, which when we come out and do an inspection, we will confirm your buffer zones are adequate, but they're intended to prevent unintended applications of prohibited substances. Okay, so here we are, 205, 203, again, under the general requirements for everyone. The nutrient management of the land, this is relevant with pasture, because when you apply to be a livestock, to be certified in livestock, you're actually certifying your pasture as your crop as well. So the tillage and cultivation practices must maintain or improve the soil and prevent erosion, and that's what organic agriculture is all about. Is you're always maintaining or improving your soil. So your this can be done through crop rotation, cover crops, or in a pasture setting. It would be by by rotating your pastures or reseeding your pastures. What's really relevant in pasture production is that you want to manage your animal nutrient, the animal waste, in such a way that it's not going to contaminate the soil or contaminate the waters in and around your pasture. So again, continuing with general requirements, seeding and planting stock. The first bullet point is again the most relevant. You're going to want to use organic seed, annual seeding and planting stock. Non-organic seed can be permitted if it's not treated and it's not GMO or has not been treated with something that is not allowed on the national list. But in general, you're going to want to use organic seed, or you're going to want to document that the organic seed was not commercially available. Again, this is relevant in livestock if you intend to seed your pasture. So here we are at 205, 206, the other regulation that was previously mentioned, and this has to do with crop pest, weed, and disease management. And again, the first bullet point is the most relevant. You must use management practices that prevent crop pest, weed, or disease. Organic agriculture is all about preventative maintenance, so you're going to want to do preventative acts to maintain, your pasture in such a way that weeds are being handled mechanically. Like for example, thistle comes to mind. You're going to want to either hand weed or do some sort of mechanical cultivation to prevent weeds in your crop. This last bullet point is actually fairly relevant because when your cultivated managed is insufficient to control the pest, well, this is something you're going to want to document in your OSP. If you have to use a substance, a synthetic substance, it has to come from the national list and it has to be documented in your OSP. If you're going to make changes, you're going to want to contact your certifier prior to use any of these synthetic substances and get approval from your certifier to make sure that the product is allowed. Okay, so here we are, livestock requirements. The origin of the livestock is relevant. Ruminant animals must be from livestock under organic management from the last third gestation. Poultry and poultry products must be from poultry under organic management no later than 2 days of life. So basically what this means is you can still buy livestock that is not organic originally, but that livestock will never itself become organic, but any offspring that it has, if the parent animal is maintained organically in those last periods of gestation, then the offspring will be organic going forward. Livestock feed is important. It must be organically produced, must include pasture. The ruminant feed must include no less than 30% from pasture, must be grazed no less than 120 calendar days per year. West Coast, these are requirements that on the West Coast are a problem. And they cannot contain slaughter byproducts. Obviously, the feed cannot contain slaughter byproducts or drugs or hormones used to promote growth. Okay, livestock living conditions. Must provide year-round access to the outdoors, must provide shade, shelter, exercise area, fresh air, and clean water. Confinement can only be allowed under certain conditions, and the bedding, if it's edible, it must also be produced organically. The grazing season, at least 30% of the dry matter must come from forage or pasture. The pasture must provide sufficient quantity and quality of grazing throughout the grazing season. So pasture practice, again, this goes back to the idea that your pasture is part of your crop. So like we mentioned previously, the pasture has to be auditable, must have a functioning management plan that is auditable, and meet the crop production requirements that we just previously discussed. It must be able to provide 30% of the ruminant's dry matter intake, the description of the pasture pasture management, the cultural management practices, the defined grazing season, the location of the size, the grazing methods, location of the fences and shelter, and the erosion control practices. All of that needs to be written up in the OSP and something that can be confirmed during the inspection. So livestock health, the producer must provide adequate health care, even if it means the animal is no longer eligible for organic certification. So the health of the animal comes first. Vaccines and veterinary care are allowed as long as the biologics are on the national list. The national list is a list that the NOP actually publishes, and you can confirm whether these things are on the list or not. So the producer is encouraged to do, again, preventative livestock health care and maintenance. So obviously the selection of the species would be a way of preventative care, feed, sufficient to meet nutritional needs, appropriate housing and pasture conditions, sanitation, exercise, and any physical alterations that are needed to promote the animal welfare, and administering of vaccines and other veterinarian care. These are all considered preventative livestock maintenance that would help meet the adequate health care for the livestock. Again, when preventative practices and veterinary biologics are inadequate, then you have to use synthetic substances. And then there are regulations on the NOP list that allow you to administer these synthetic medications. Allowed parasitics may be used as long as they are not done during lactating periods or in a third gestation of the birth of the next her animal, and obviously in dairy stock there are regulations prior to milk production. So this is sort of a recap of livestock certification. The producer must not obviously sell product that is not organic. The administration of animal or drug or other vaccines in the absence of illness. The administrator can't administer hormones or promote anything that promotes growth. No synthetic parasitics on a routine basis. No synthetic parasitics for slaughter stock. And obviously not administer any drugs that would violate the Food and Drug Act. You are not allowed to withhold treatment from a sick animal in an effort to preserve its organic status. All appropriate medications must be used to restore the animal's health. If 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 acceptable organic production were to fail and you did need to use the synthetic substances, then that animal would have to be labeled and taken out of your organic circulation. It could still be harvested, but it just could not be sold as an organic product. So it's important to note that organic livestock and meat must be slaughtered at a certified organic facility for the final product to be considered organic. So the two categories of organic certification are producer and handler. So producers are crop farm producers and livestock producers. Handlers a handling certificate is required for any processing of agricultural products, and a lot of the end product of slaughter is considered processing. So you need a handler's certificate if you organic handler certificate if you want to sell the handling product. So a lot of farmers, Jill and I both have livestock farms in our territory, that since there's not a lot of certified organic slaughterhouses in our area, they are choosing to process their product on farm, and you can do that. You just need to get an organic certificate for handling as well as your livestock certificate. Okay, Jill, you want to take over?
So some of the common challenges and issues of concern we see in like the first year during transition is record keeping is the biggest one. Record keeping is a huge part of organic certification because we have to have that documentation that shows all the activities and transactions that are occurring, and they have to be readily available at the inspection. So a lot of times I tell people, like we're looking for the information and it doesn't matter like what format you have it in, as long as that information is there and we can understand it. The second biggest issue we have is the allowed and prohibited substances. A lot of times whenever you buy like a material you want to use, you need to make sure it's been approved by us before applying it. And so there's a couple of databases that you can Google approved products. Like if you need a fertilizer, if you go to the OMRI database, OMRI is a private company and they review materials that are allowed for organic certification. So it's a lot easier for us to approve products that have already been through a review by a outside company. So like a lot of times we just really encourage people to ask us before they buy it, just to verify it is allowed. So a lot of times with my operations, they can like text me a picture of the product or they can email it to me and I can usually give them an answer pretty quickly. And then another one is people don't update their OSP like they need to. And that's the information that we really need to have if you're making any changes at your operation. It has to be reflected on your OSP. Some other ones to keep in mind is treated lumber. Livestock and crops cannot come in contact with treated lumber, but it doesn't prevent an operation from becoming certified. Once certified, the treated lumber cannot be used for new installations or replacement purposes. And then if you do have treated lumber, you just have to provide sufficient buffers or barriers to prevent the animal from coming in contact with treated lumber. That can be like used with electrical wiring, anything like that. And then also the use of the term organic, going back to making sure if you're raising organic livestock, it has to go through a certified organic processor, or you can become certified to process your own livestock depending on your preference. And then if you do decide to sell anything, all labels have to be approved by us, because there are certain things that a label has to have once you're a certified organic operation, including like who you're certified by. And then there's also certain ways that you can display the USDA organic seal. And so it can only be displayed one of three ways. The green and the brown label, and then also the black can be on a clear or white background. And then finally, the biggest challenge we also have or see is people, they don't submit their OSP updates or pay their fees on time. And it usually results in a non-compliance, which can be readily remedied once they reach out to us and tell us why they're late to paying or updating their OSP. Some final thoughts is once again, record keeping for organic certification is not overly burdensome. We just ask that you're recording what you're doing at your operation, anything that's changing. Organic certification is affordable because they do have that cost share program. And then we encourage you to, conduct your market research and see if organic certification for you is what you need, and if it's profitable in your area. And then we also encourage you to really look over the organic regulations, the NOP handbook, and other resources. There's a lot of guidance documents out there. And so the guidance documents kind of takes the regulation and breaks it down to make it in a form that's more understandable on what you can and can't do. And then also evaluating other certifying agents if you decide not to go with Clemson. There's plenty of private certifiers out there. Their fees are a little more expensive, but they may be a little bit faster at certification. And then if you are really interested in becoming certified, start conversations with us and see how we can help you and answer any of your questions. And then developing or adopting a record system that meets your needs and complies with the regulations. Every operation is very different, so how you keep your records is really up to you as long as you have that information there. And then often request verification from your certifier early to avoid any issues of concern or non-compliances, especially going back to figuring out what materials you can and can't use in organic certification. And these are some of our resources on the left here. And then this is our contact information if you have additional questions or would like to chat one-on-one. We're here to answer any questions that you have.